this year, a new Ultraman movie was animated by ILM at Lucasfilm and released on Netflix. I was actually able to go to Skywalker Ranch as well as ILM at Lucasfilm to learn how they made the movie. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, have you seen Ultraman Rising? What did you think about it, and what is your point of reference? Are you an old school Ultraman fan coming in evaluating it from a fan's perspective? Are you someone new to the world of Ultraman, and this was your on-ramp? So as for me, I first learned about Ultraman back in spring break of 1993. My family went on vacation to Hong Kong. Before I was born, the rest of my family lived in Hong Kong. And so we went back for the week. And while we were there, at all the stores we went to, they had this cool looking guy, and it was Ultraman. So I actually bought a few Ultraman toys without knowing who Ultraman was and brought them back. I had my mom go through all of my old toys and try and find them. She wasn't able to. Plot twist, 30 minutes after I finished shooting this review, I got a text from my mom and she found my Ultraman toys. I didn't tell her that I was shooting this video today. I'm just out of the blue. Oh, I have another idea of where I can look for the toys, and she was able to find them. And so these are my 30-year-old Ultraman toys. And a little point of reference, during our trip, they gave us some of the new Ultraman toys. You got a little Emmy there as well. Very easy to lose that one right there, but there you go. Ultraman toys, 30 years apart. Fun times. But that was my introduction to Ultraman, and then just a year or two after that, Power Rangers exploded, and so there's kind of this onslaught of all the distributors trying to find these different Japanese superhero type shows that they could convert over, and one of those was a version of Ultraman. I'm not even sure which one, but I remember it ran at 6 a.m., so I would wake up before school and I would watch this version of Ultraman. Jump forward to just a couple years back, Shin Ultraman played at Fantastic Fest, and I wasn't crazy about the film, but I appreciated watching something and experiencing something different. When I was invited to go to ILM and Skywalker Ranch to check out Ultraman Rising and how it was made, I was a little bit skeptical because I didn't want to go and cover a movie that I didn't like. So I had my family sit down, like, let's watch this. Let's see if I actually enjoy the movie. And I don't want to spoil things too much, but there's a reason that I decided to go on the trip and learn from the filmmakers. But Netflix basically invited out a bunch of critics and film journalists to watch a series of presentations at Skywalker Sound at ILM, where they made the movie. We learned how the movie was made from the filmmakers, which was a very cool experience. I put up a video where I discussed kind of the whole process. You can check that out wherever that link is around here. But I also got to interview the director, the composer, and the VFX supervisor, which some of that will appear in this review. That's a lot of backstory going into covering this movie, but in the context of this specific review, I think it's very important to understand where I'm coming from with my experience with the film. All of that said, let's get started with the good. And the biggest compliment that I can give this film is that it feels like an Ultraman movie made for everyone. It's soaked in Ultraman lore. It takes place in Japan, and there's a lot of Japanese culture in it, but it tells an entirely universal story. It's designed to be an on-ramp for new fans to become fans of Ultraman. I went in with some background knowledge about Ultraman, having watched some Ultraman back in the day and then Shin Ultraman just a couple years ago, but I watched it with my wife and 3 kids, and none of them have any knowledge of Ultraman, and all of us had a good time with the movie. Everyone could enjoy it, and we connected with different pieces to it, whether connecting with the cute little baby kaiju or connecting with the superhero elements. Everyone can connect with something. It's very fantastical, but it's also very human. And the other like, big compliment I can give this movie, and maybe it's not the best compliment to say about a movie from a different studio, but it felt like an Ultraman movie made by like DreamWorks. It reminded me of a bunch of my favorite DreamWorks movies, including the one that came out this year, The Wild Robot, where it's a story about an unlikely father. And some of my favorite DreamWorks movies are these stories about unlikely parents, unusual bonds between children and beasts and creatures like that. Whether you're talking about How to Train Your Dragon, Abominable, Wild Robot, it has that kind of flavor to it because it's about Ultraman, who his whole role is battling kaiju, finds himself the parent of a kaiju. And that's so very emotionally potent. It's dramatically interesting and makes for an unexpected character arc for the character. And so much of what elevates this movie and makes it so universally appealing and works for all audiences is that the movie is so character-based, that it is all about relationships between children and parents. There's all of these different, every main character in it, there's some dynamic related to a parent or a child in it, or both. And the ways that those relationships can be broken, can be formed, can be restored and redeemed. And so that just permeates the entire film. This is actually an idea that the director, who's a lifelong Ultraman fan, has had in his mind for 20 years. Movie was over 20 years in the making. When did you join the process?
So I remember Shannon Tindle, the director and writer, talking to me about a very different version of the same, what turned into Ultraman Rising back when it was called Made in Japan. It was at a different studio. It was a similar concept, but it was based on, it was inspired by Ultraman, but was not an Ultraman property. That project fell through, but I was starting to get really excited about it. And then amazingly, somehow the way these things happen is that script got in the hands of Tsuburaya and then Netflix, and all of a sudden it became, instead of doing a derivative movie or an homage, you do the real thing.
And it was that merging of this lore that he loves with these deeply personal stories about family. He wanted to merge those together. In fact, the biggest influence on this Ultraman movie is maybe the least expected film that it could be. A lot of modern franchise films feel like they're only inspired by previous entries in that same franchise. It was called like creative inbreeding. Yeah. And one thing I enjoyed about this is that it did pull all those outside influences. What were some film influences that were outside of the expected for a project like this?
Kramer versus Kramer was a big one, and I mentioned before I learned to stop saying that in pitches because we're going to make this big fun family movie, and the inspiration is a film about divorce. But to me, I see that film as about a love story between a parent and child, a father who's not really being a father, who's forced to fall in love with the son, and the son falls in love with him, and that makes them both better people, and it actually resolves the conflict.
I mean, it's inspired by Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah.
For a big superhero action movie, I think that surprises a lot of people. But if you watch it again, which you should, it's really a story about fathers and sons and daughters and mothers, and it's about parenting.
But that's the passion behind it. Someone that loves Ultraman and loves the story about broken families and merges those two things together. And what that means in the context of the story is that whenever the Ultraman action happens, it's always a part of his character arc. The best sports movies use the sport itself as a visual metaphor, an external example of the inner struggle of the character. Whether a victory or a loss in the sport itself signifies what's going on inside of the character. And that's what this movie does with Ultraman and his battling with kaiju and the way that he interacts with them publicly. It's all a part of his character arc and his journey. Like, in particular, when you move into the final battle, and it's designed to be the culmination of all the conflicts of the story of this point in time, as well as all the character arcs. It means it's able to kind of have these crescendo moments of characters making choices, of characters coming together, and you get the spectacle, but it's also emotionally profound and resonant. A couple other final interesting little details in here. They had a lot of fun with the score and the soundtrack.
Part of what makes the score for it so cool is it's pulling from all these different places where it's heroic, it's tragic, it's 8-bit video game sounds, it's electric guitars. Where did that idea come from to have all these eclectic set of ideas brought together for something that feels so harmonious?
So before I even began thinking about what instruments I wanted to be using to tell my version of the story, Shannon had already pitched a bunch of music ideas. He had already pitched the idea of orchestra meets 8-bit sort of video game console, which of course is right up my alley. I love the idea. I had no interest in putting electric guitar into the score, but as soon as I heard Tim Henson play guitar, I was like, he sounds like a superhero.
Yeah.
Likewise, as a movie, on the one hand, it's not super stylized in the way that some of the Sony Lord and Miller projects are just hyper stylized in the way they do things, but there is splashes of big style in this. The VFX supervisor kind of described what that looked like.
I forget the phrase that you used for it, but kind of this big iconic shots in it.
Atomo moments.
Atomo moments. How did you decide what was the right images, the right moments where you wanted to have that complemented the story?
I mean, that's one of the great things about working with directors like Shannon Tindle and John Aoshima. It's communication. We talk about it, we kind of look at the story, and we realise that these are the kind of points where maybe you don't want to communicate everything through words, you want to communicate it through visuals, and you want to kind of give the viewer a sense of how Ken or Ultraman is feeling. So when Emmy is born in front of Ken, he doesn't say anything, but the clouds part and you see this kind of glow, almost like a kind of, the image is a glow of his soul just falling in love with this newborn baby. And that was really important. It's a really important piece of storytelling for the piece.
And finally, the most important thing about this movie is that it featured a Sex Pistols song in a family movie in the year 2024, and I loved that. All of a sudden, breaks into the Sex Pistols. I was like, hey, some old British punk in here. That's awesome. Overall, I really enjoyed this film. Absolutely won me over. And it's an example of how to take something that is very fan lore heavy and could be very inaccessible to broader audiences, to American audiences, and it finds a way to package it in a very accessible, universal way. From there, let's move on to the mixed aspects of the film. These aren't good or bad things, they're just additional things to discuss. The first one is that the movie does have a mid-credit scene that is worth watching or staying for. You're at your home, so it's worth fast-forwarding to it. But essentially, the movie kind of has one big dangling plot thread that they keep referencing something, and then the credits start rolling and they haven't really followed it up. The mid-credit scene follows that up. So if they're able to do a sequel, you know where they're going, and they tease something related to this big mystery in the film. Other thing, once again, not a good or bad thing about the movie, because I do think that this movie is such a good on-ramp for Ultraman, the big question is, if you watch this movie and you go, oh, I like that. I really like Ultraman. I want to dig deeper. What should you watch next? I'm not the right person to answer that. So I asked the directors of this movie, here's their answer.
If someone watches this film and they go, I want to dig a little bit deeper into the world of Ultraman, what are some of the other entries in the series that you would recommend as those next steps?
Well, John mentioned our personal favorite is Ultra 7, which was the second character in the series. Then there's the Shin Ultraman movie that Hideaki Anno produced and wrote. That's another great way that condenses that first season of the series kind of into one movie, and it's really fun and really out there. And that stuff, you can watch it on YouTube. You can find it. Super Eyes made it available. So
there's a new series, Ultraman Arc.
Yeah, Ultraman Arc just came out. Yeah, and people are loving it. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can check out.
From there, let's move on to the bad. And the big thing here is that the movie just has a lot in there. And for an animated film for families, it's very long. If you keep in mind, the longest animated film that Hollywood has ever released is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and it's something like 2 hours and 17 minutes long. This movie is 2 hours and 2 minutes long. Any animated feature for families that's over 2 hours long, that's a pretty long runtime that you have to earn. And in the case of this movie, I just think there was a little bit too much that they tried to put into the film. So just in the first 20-25 minutes of the film, it has a prologue of our Ultraman when he was a child. It then introduces his baseball career. It introduces his Ultraman career. It puts out ideas about his reputation as a baseball player and as Ultraman. It introduces his reputation with a reporter. It introduces his broken relationship with his father. It introduces his relationship with Ebi, the baby kaiju. It introduces his relationship and the conflict with the governing organization. This is all in the first 30 minutes. So there's so many main plots, there's so many subplots, and there's so many different interactions that it feels like we're having to, jump around between a lot of different things. And because of that, there's a few too many big stretches where there's not enough Ultraman action. Now, one of the good things about the movie is every time Ultraman action happens, it has significance for his character arc and his development. But that also means you don't have action in the middle of it where it doesn't make any sense for there to be any character moments there. So they're like right around the whole midsection of it where he's becoming a parent and he's fixing his baseball career. You're like, wait, am I watching an Ultraman movie or am I watching a parenting movie? And so there's a little bit of that lack of balance because there are so many things kind of going on in the film. And I wonder if some of this goes back to the creation of the film, where for a long time there was a version of it that wasn't an Ultraman movie. It was an Ultraman-inspired movie. And so you wonder if it has all the plot lines that needed to be there for a non-Ultraman version, plus everything that's mandatory as an Ultraman film. And you just get a film that's a little bit too stuffed. There's a little bit too much in there. So everything feels like you want a bit more time with it, or not so stretched out between your installments of the different elements that you like. You need to cut something to tighten it up to, I think, have the best version of this film. Like in my mind, the baseball stuff didn't really add enough to the film to justify how much time his baseball career got. But I think some of that is also baseball is very popular in Japan, and so it probably plays different amongst primary Ultraman fans versus me. I played baseball growing up. I haven't watched baseball outside of going to the Dell Diamond down the road from my house in forever. But all that said, it's all well done. I thoroughly enjoyed the film. There just is a lot stuffed into the movie. Real quick before I give you my final thoughts, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about Ultraman Rising? Or this is your first introduction to it and you're gonna go and check it out based off my recommendation? I would love to hear that. Also, one way you can support the channel is by watching those interviews that I did, whether the individual ones or the compilation one, or watching my vlog about going to ILM, Skywalker Ranch, all that fun stuff. As someone with only a casual knowledge of Ultraman, I thought that this movie did a great job of taking this franchise with a deep lore that's not super familiar to a lot of American audiences, and found a way to package it in a way that makes for a great on-ramp. It's very accessible because it touches in on such universal elements about being a child, being a parent, and the conflicts that come with all of that, all with this Ultraman skin that gives you the fantasy elements, the spectacular elements to it. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. My whole family enjoyed it. And if you're looking to watch something different, even if you're new to Ultraman, this is a good on-ramp. Overall, it's a B+ on the entertainment scale, and 8 out of 10. And if you like the idea of a DreamWorks superhero movie, that's kind of what this is. It's not a DreamWorks movie. It is a Netflix original that was put out by Lucasfilm's animators at ILM, but it has that flavor of a DreamWorks superhero movie which I think is pretty cool. If you like that pitch, check it out on Netflix. If you're so inclined, please watch these interviews and vlogs in their entirety. That sort of thing really can help the channel open doors in the future for more opportunities to interview talent, which I think really enlightens a review when you're able to do that. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.